Welcome back to Let's Talk Race and Modern. I'm your host, Harrison Paul. Today we're going to talk about a domestic situation. A few days ago, there was a lie that was told by the far-right group that I actually reported on. It was about a 7-year-old girl from the town I was actually raised in, Selbridge, and that false story that she was raped by 3 migrants. Now, the 3 migrants story for me always seemed very a little bit unbelievable. Why? Because more times when foreigners come here, we come here to with aspiration. That he would throw his life away. These guys would throw their life away for a 7-year-old girl just seems very it just doesn't seem real to me. And of course that was the case, which is quite like this other situation I was saying that, in the last video I was talking about how a man was saying, they purposely don't report on situations regarding foreigners and what they do. And it's just also a very flawed perspective to think that we are protected at any time, even if it is for the government's agenda. So we're going to watch the video of what happened in the doll and when it was spoken about.
Thanks a lot, Ken Corla. On Tuesday night, a crowd gathered outside Selbridge Manor. That's where more than 100 people seeking asylum, children, women and men, live. And the crowd chanted, "Paedophiles out. Deport them now. Get them out." There were threats made to burn the building where people live, to burn the building down. Why? Because of a disgusting lie spread on social media by far-right agitators. The lie was that a 7-year-old girl had been raped in the hotel by 3 non-Irish men. First shared by a supporter of the Irish Freedom Party online, and then amplified by far-right agitators Fergus Power and Derek Bly, and people were called to protest. It was a lie. These people do not care about the truth. They're happy to spread lies with the aim of deceiving people and the aim of whipping people up. 2 weeks ago,
Now, my problem and my issue with these times that we're living in is the fact that there's actually 2 problems taking place. One of the problems being that there are people who would like to see themselves as sober-minded people being having a rational way of seeing the situation, not just the situation at hand, but in general, the migrant story. And then there's, of course, the very radical people who feel like all migrants are criminals and, completely dehumanize people like me. Now, but the point that I want to get to is that even the compromised perspective that says, listen, the government I've heard a perspective that says the government are at fault. Why they're at fault? Because they are putting, these migrants in these impoverished areas and causing friction between the migrants and whatever, when they could be putting them in, let's say, more expensive areas like Blackrock and stuff like that. So all in all, there is still a sentiment of, okay, listen, we are open to people coming in, but we have to be a little bit more responsible about how we let people in. And I feel like that is the sober-minded perspective that, your respectable citizen in Ireland is holding at the moment. And for me, that is still a very dangerous one. And I already mentioned before that there was a brother who was kind of speaking on, look, it's very right for the Irish people to feel like they're not being looked after, that they're being let down. And for me, what I've been trying to stress to people is that you are looking at a people who are so ungrateful to even not understand how much of their development in general comes from the people, these African people. I think there's more of a responsibility on them teaching their society how much they actually get from Africa. Now, we can talk about the direct benefit, which is the fact that there's an incentive to bring people here. Nothing in this life is free. It's not free to bring people from Africa. They're not just doing it out of their, the goodness of their heart. There's an incentive. And when we talk about the incentive, we talk about the EU. And there's a very wonderful quote that I think she's the Prime Minister of Italy. And she said this. I'm going to put this up on the screen. The solution is not to take the Africans and bring them to Europe. The solution is to free Africa from certain Europeans who exploit it. Now, she obviously puts certain to try and make herself free herself from that and vindicate herself. But she's very right in many ways. And, the EU, I think I seen a statistic quite recently, I'll put up on the screen. According to the Department of Finance's budgetary statistics, in 2019, Ireland received 1.9 billion from the EU budget in receipts. Around 85% of this funding goes to the agricultural sector and more broadly towards rural development projects. So this is important for people to understand that there's incentives. And I feel and I understand, and of course, I'm still to look properly into it. But when we look at and we use our logic, we'll understand that, okay, nothing is being done for free. It's not because Ireland love Africans and this is the warped perspective that Europeans have. It's like, oh, we've been helping Africans for so long because they haven't been able to help themselves. You're not understanding that you are part of a European Union. This European Union take raw minerals from Africa. That is what the EU, the benefit of the EU is. You take raw minerals from Africa, chocolate, cobalt, copper, you name it, long list of minerals. It'll be here all day. Chocolate, should have said cocoa. You take the raw minerals, right? Gas as well is in there. Oil is in there. And the strategic move of the places like institutions like IMF, World Bank, EU and then UN is that when these people were being formed, they formed themselves with the understanding that Africa should be the big dog. We could talk about the fact that when they were formed, Africa was still really under captivity. So when these places were formed, they were formed to benefit their friend group, if you get what I'm trying to say. Not to give respect to Africa, but rather their friend group. And it's important to understand this. Okay, listen, we're not going to cry over spilt milk as Africans, but it's very important to understand this. Why? Because you will not allow anybody to make you feel like a visitor for a country that you've built. Europe take raw minerals from Africa, disperse them between each other, like they did in 1884 in the Berlin Conference, and they split Africa into a pizza. They split it amongst themselves, and then countries are able to grow and benefit from this exploitation of Africa. This is why the African is not able to develop himself. I'm going to give you a very important fact that you need to understand. Let's give an example. France, there are countries in Africa who are still paying colonial tax to France. There are countries in Africa that France is still printing their money. When you understand this, you understand it in the perspective to know that this is not long ago, nor has it been cleansed, nor were the contracts for independence even fair contracts. I think it's so funny when people ask themselves the question of like, oh, well, they're free, or they were colonized, but they're free, or we were colonized, we had to fight. You weren't as rich as Africa. Respectfully, you were not as rich as Africa. People can afford to let you go and survive tomorrow. Literally, people can afford to let you go and survive tomorrow. If Africa is to regain its strength, the whole European Union economy crashes. In this greedy world, do you really think we are letting foreigners into our country because we are kind people? In this cruel, greedy world, do you really think foreigners are being given a chance to come in the country? There's an incentive. There is business being done. And it's funny because my girlfriend, she asked me today, she said, why doesn't the government just say, oh, we're bringing Africans because ABC? Well, when you're stealing, you can't say it out loud. When you're doing things that are not ethical, you could not say that out loud. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if you're walking, so it reminds me of the movie of, with Will Smith and his son. And a lot of times the son will be like, Dad, where are we going? And how does the dad explain to the son that we're in a very complicated scenario that he doesn't want to say out loud? Will doesn't want to say this situation out loud. I believe that the government are in a space where they get so many things unethically that to say out loud. So you have to understand that the privileges you actually have right now in Ireland come to the detriment of somebody else. And then they sold you the story about corruption. I can't count how many times people have come to me to say the great secret of Africa. Don't you know your leaders are corrupt? This great top secret about our corruption. Completely and utterly false. I appreciate Irish people who have understanding and knowledge and who are not ignorant. I'm going to play one of my favorite people, Claire Daly. And I'm not sure this man's name, and I'm so sorry. I'm going to discover it, and I might even put it on the screen. These are probably two of my favorite videos ever. Why? Because seeing white people speak this way with such honesty and such self-reflection is something that I believe our community or our world is void of. I'm going to play about 3 videos, so bear with me because they are so important. I wanted to play 4. 4 might be a little bit too much, but we're going to go with 3. I'm going to start with this small clip. Check this out.
People are dying to get to Europe. They're coming from countries that have been subjected to European colonialism, that have been ransacked with wars in which Europe played no good part. And we build higher walls to keep them out. Welcome to our European values.
The relation of the EU to the continent of Africa has been and still is one of brutal capitalist exploitation in the service of maintaining Western corporate profits. This criminal history cemented in place a structure of intentional de-development that saw the enormous wealth of Africa flow directly into European coffers for hundreds of years, and little has changed. The unmentioned spirit haunting the aspirational language in this text is China. China has approached many African countries with more attractive ways of doing business, and if Europe wants to compete, it's going to have to change its approach. If all the recommendations in this report were followed to the letter, the world would be a better place. But the report does not go near far enough. There is no mention of France's colonial currency, no mention of debt cancellation. We are continuing to pauperise the global south. We enrich ourselves at their expense, morning, noon and night.
Africa trade policy as it exists now, because our economic relations with Africa are simply a continuation of European colonialism, perpetuating exploitation by other means. Africa trades more with Europe than it does with itself. It's portrayed as a poor continent, but actually it's the richest. It's just that the people there are denied the fruits of their land and their labour by unequal economic relations, by unfair trade rules, by illicit capital flights into the Western banks, and by multinational corporations allowed off the leash by Washington, London and Brussels. This report would begin to change that, but I think it'd take a revolution to actually make that a reality.
You know what disappoints me the most about Africans? But it also simultaneously explains to me the damage that we go through. It frustrates me that you expect the criminals themselves to give you the truth. It frustrates me that you expect the criminal themselves to give you the truth. It frustrates me so much that you expect the criminal to give you the truth. We have this culture within African culture, which is the reason why we have a submissive culture here within the African Irish diaspora, where we believe ourselves to be incapable, to be incompetent, and that is a reflection of our countries, and that is a reflection of our nation. Whether you like it or not, that warped belief dictates how you carry yourself, even here in Europe, in the West. And I see it in Africans. Because if you are known to come from a people where you see yourself as the lucky one and a competent black person, and you're trying to break free and elevate from the usual standard, this is what you believe now, the usual standard of what it is to be a black African person. Because the narrative on the African was that he was not competent. He was stupid, unintelligent, and primitive. We like to believe these days are over, but these days are with us right now, brothers and sisters. This is why this narrative is so important. Because it keeps these people in the dark with what they're doing. And if you expect them to tell the truth about what they're doing, you've got another thing coming. We have a man called Julius Malema, who is running for president in South Africa. But they have silenced him and demonized him. Why isn't Africa as a people clinging to his message? Because we do not see ourselves in his message. We do not believe his message because we do not identify with his message. We don't identify that we are well-capable people. We first think, oh, surely we are not the best people. But you know what? There are some good eggs who come out and move to Europe and are able to succeed or able to excel. So we internalize the state of Africa as though it is not neocolonialism at hand. And why I think this mentality is so dangerous, for reasons in the diaspora and reasons back home, is because it helps cover and keep the real perpetrator in the dark. I am trying to begin this page, and I began this page on a journey for self-determination. And on that journey for self-determination, I began to realize that is it exactly that which causes the Negro his current day failure. And I'll end on this. Please do not underestimate the damage that colonialism not only did to the African resources and neocolonialism and the land itself, but the most dangerous and most damaged good is the mind and the soul of the African. He lost belief in himself, and you see this fake sense of belief where he walks with a bounce walk, he walks with a swag in his walk, but really it's fabricated. It's not to the core of who he is. It is low racial self-esteem. And that is what the colonizer did to the African. He has low racial self-esteem. Brothers and sisters, you need to understand your history and you need to understand neocolonialism. No one has done you a favor here in Europe. Nobody has done you a favor here in Europe. You are here because they are there. Thank you so much for watching.
And I'm on a mission for you.